Hello and welcome to Social Media for Humans, the podcast that empowers you to do social differently. Your host, Alexis Bushnell, and her guests discuss their experience of social media as business owners, users, and ultimately humans, with insights and advice to help you find an effective and ethical strategy that works for you. Grab yourself a drink and join the conversation.
Hello. I am here with wonderful Emma, whose book I love, just by the way. Which kind of gives away her intro. But do introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello. So I'm Emma Young. My pronouns are she and her. By day, I'm a sustainability advisor, and I help companies with their communication around social and environmental issues. But more interestingly, potentially, by night, I'm a new author, and I've written 2 books, the First Ethereal and the forthcoming sequel to that book, The Cold of Summer.
Which I am beyond excited for.
Oh, thank you.
So, did you always want to be a writer?
Yes and no, I guess. So I loved writing when I was a kid. I actually wanted to be a geologist, and then I wanted to be a chemical engineer, as you do when you're, 10 or 12 or whatever. But then when I left school, I kind of realised after I did a stint in a genetics lab for work experience, and it became really clear, I think, that my animal kind of affinity and love for animals was always going to kind of bump up against my scientific, career even before it began. So from I think about 18, I kind of switched and decided to go back into more the kind of art side of things, and kind of switched into degree-wise, I ended up doing a business degree and kind of left my science career behind. So writing was always something I loved to do, but it didn't really kind of appear as I wonder if I could write a book until probably my mid-20s.
Oh, interesting. So when did you first start writing your first book?
It was probably, I went to a night class in Windsor, and I remember the tutor just hated everything I wrote. It was just really complimentary, but he was into like really dark, kind of gritty fantasy. And my comments would come back and he'd be like, I would write kind of quite light and kind of emotional, kind of, typically kind of young female stuff at the time. And he'd be like through gritted teeth, it's nice, but you thought about a little tension in here, like maybe a death or so so Ethereal really started as I think it was a short story called the Latecomer, and it was when I first met Storm, who was this character who at the time was like a medium who had lost her powers, her connection, and she just fascinated me. I didn't know why she'd lost the connection or anything, but it was just one of those things that kind of stayed with me. And weirdly, like probably halfway through drafting, I decided to make her a witch as well, because it kind of dawned on me that this is my book, this is my world, like I can have dragons if I want, and up until then I've been playing in this little safe box of like, well, these are the rules, and then I realized I could make them up. It was quite liberating. So that would have been 2009 that
Wow.
I started that class. Yeah, quite a long time now.
That is a long time ago. Why is it taking you? Because you published it last year, the year before?
2020. Yeah.
So
the only good things come out of the pandemic for me was, hey, I did a book. I think the typical answer is, I was in a corporate job. I was in quite a demanding corporate job. I was going into London kind of 3 days a week. I loved my work, and I ended up writing, not even like on the, in the evenings or anything. I know loads of people talk about writing on the train. I was working on a train, there and on the way back. So I don't really get to write the weekend or on holiday. And then I spent more time reading what I'd written in the last session than actually adding to it. So it kind of like crept along. And I didn't know what I was doing. You know, who does when you start doing something brand new? But so that's the kind of, you know, official answer. But I think the bigger issue was just fear. You know, I was terrified that I'd put this book into the world and people would go, A, who is she to think she can write a book? Or B, that it would be so bad that people would just like point and laugh. And I think that held me back for a long time. And it was just convenient to say, oh, I haven't got time, I'm so busy. But you know, life marches on, and before you know it, a decade's gone by and you haven't done the thing that you think you really want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is a fear that a lot of people come up against in different ways, and especially like with social media, I see it a lot. This sort of fear of, I don't want to put myself out there because then what will people think? What will people say? How will people react? So yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Definitely. There's a lovely quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she said, procrastination is fear in fancy shoes. And I think that is so perfect, because yeah, sums it up beautifully.
Yeah, that's definitely that is bang on. So you published independently,
yeah,
rather than sort of shopping around for a publisher. Why?
I think when you begin anything like this, you kind of, there is a bit of a formula or an expected path, and I started kind of looking into it, and it was right, okay, well, you know, A, finish the book. That was like really key. And when it became clear that, you know, I was actually going to finish it, I kind of started looking for agents and publishers. So, you know, the whole querying agents process. But at the same time, I knew a couple of people who had literally just landed publishing deals, and I was like, you know, super impressed, and, you know, slightly like in awe. And then after that all kind of calmed down a bit, they were telling me like horror stories that hadn't even occurred to me, like, yeah, well, I've got this 2-3 book deal, whatever, but I have to change my title and I have to change my characters, and I've had to rewrite 3/4 of the book. And I was just like, why would you do that? You know, this is your book, this is your baby. And they were like, that's how it works. And, you know, obviously traditional publishers and the whole machine around it, these are super smart people. They know what they're doing. They know how to sell a book. But to me, like, control freak that I am, you know, I'm independent in every other area of my life. The thought of giving this kind of baby of 10 years gestation over to a third party and going, okay, over to you then, and having no real control over it, I just felt a bit horrifying. And I think that there was a big kind of turning point in that I went to a writers' conference, and I only went because I go to like a little writers group every week, and our teacher, Rebecca Fernley, she's an author herself, and she's brilliant. She's always like, if any of us say, oh, I'm not really a writer, you know, she's on you. She's just like, no, you are, you write, therefore you're a writer, just stop being coy about it. So she's great, and she kind of persuaded quite a few of us to go. And I did a like publishing 101 workshop with a guy called Scott Pack, I think, who's been around publishing for a long time. He's written books on, you know, traditional and indie. And I did this 101 course, and he did the pros and cons of traditional and indie. And I sat there thinking, oh my God, why would anybody go traditional? You know, I get it, I completely do. But for book one, especially when you realise that, you know, as an indie author, you get, you know, typically between 30 and 70% royalty on your books. When you're traditional, that could be like 7%. And if you're really top end, you might get like 20-25%. And I just looked at the numbers and thought, that, you know, does that balance up in terms of my desire for control and not having to do all the hard work myself? So after that, it became clear that what I really was looking for, which everybody's looking for, right, is validation. You know, I wanted somebody to go, yeah, it's good enough. Yeah. You know, we know what we're talking about, and we think it's good enough. But ultimately, your readers are going to do that. They're either going to buy the book and love it and leave a good review and validate the whole thing, or they're not. So after that, I think I sent out 4 agent query letters in 2 years, so I certainly wasn't putting my shoulder into it anyway.
I think one of the other reasons people think about going sort of the traditional route is also because they feel like they're going to get a lot of support in all of the other stuff, like marketing and just everything, that they're not going to have to do all of those things. Of course, if you go independent, that it's all you are 100% of the book creation, marketing, everything machine.
Oh yeah.
So I will say the few authors I know who have been published in the traditional way, all of them say they get next to no support, like for marketing especially, that it's very much like, well, it's in your contract to post X amount of times on social media, and so they post. That's the extent of the support. You need to post on social media. So you're having to do it all. How has social media sort of helped with the marketing? Has it made it easier? Has it made it harder?
I think that there's a bit of a kind of Marmite thing in the indie author world about social media. So people who are quite well established are kind of, sometimes they feel like they've kind of moved beyond it and are a little bit dismissive about it. And there's a lot of opportunity for people to relieve you of large sums of money to teach you how to do things like social media advertising, so Facebook ads or even things like Amazon ads and all the other kind of author related platforms. And I think really early on I realized that from a point of view of advertising, unless you've got a big back catalogue, you haven't got enough places for people to go. So you get a cost of acquisition from an ad, and if you've got one book, then you can only ever make one sale. And whereas if you've got 10 books and people will kind of become a fan and they'll read all 10, then your cost per acquisition is far more doable for a small indie publisher. So but then on the flip side, I think it then leaves social media as almost being the poor man's advertising. And it's taken me a while to kind of play all of this out in my own brain, as I juggle various things. And at the moment I'm taking the view that this is a really long game. Ideally I will get to the point in a few years where I've got 4, 5, 6, however many books, and in the meantime, I don't want to use social media as my marketing vehicle. The books need to be the marketing vehicle. I want to see them as an opportunity. A wise woman, not a million miles away from here, virtually, told me, it is an opportunity to connect with people and to build an audience and to build relationships. And I think when that clicked in my brain, it became a lot easier to say, this is about making connections with the right people. It's not just about building followers or getting people kind of looking at your books and making the prettiest kind of Instagram grid. That was never going to be me. I'm never going to be like pink and pastels and everything branded, because you see is what you get. In a nice way, I would say I'm eclectic, but you're going to get a book picture and then a dog picture, and then look at this parsnip I grew, or look, squirrel. So and I'd rather have that as my my online presence than something that's overly curated, because that just wouldn't be me. So yeah, social media is important, but not as a kind of handle to drive sales.
It's interesting you say it's sort of the poor man's advertising, because I think that kind of it pitches it as sort of a cheap and nasty way, I guess, to market. But for me, I kind of feel like it's the poor man's advertising, because you can do it for free at the cost of your time.
Yes.
But the power and kind of the magic of it is that connection. It is that, like, as an author, you can have direct conversations with the people reading your books. You can see what they're loving as they're reading it. Even you can see their reviews immediately. You can reply to them and say, thank you so much, and you mentioned this, why didn't you like that, what would you have preferred, what would you have made the ending? and you can build that sort of community around it and get that feedback that then, if you want to, you can incorporate into future books. So you can have a bit of fan service, if you will, or you can not, and you can, but you've built that community. And I do think, especially like the Bookstagram, BookTube communities and the book groups on Facebook, like people who are into books are so passionate about books.
Yeah, definitely.
Like they are really invested, and they love to talk to authors, and they love to talk to each other. So the community is so strong, and being able to get into that community on social media and make those connections is so powerful if you then want to launch a book. Because people like the Bookstagram and BookTube communities, like they really want to support people. It doesn't seem to be, certainly the readers, it doesn't seem to be like, oh no, this book is trash, that book is trash. It's much more like, have you heard of this amazing indie author? I've just read their first book. It's so incredible. You have to read it. Here's why. And that is a really, really powerful place to be. So as much as it might not be, you know, reaching millions of people or billboard ads in the middle of London or whatever, or primetime TV even, it is, in my mind, a much more powerful way to market, because you have that direct connection with the actual people who are invested in you and what you want to do.
Yeah, 100% agree, because I think it becomes a conversation and a relationship builder, and that is way more valuable. And I think a lot of this kind of, I don't want to say snootiness, but you know, in marketing we talk about the marketing mix, you know, and the fact that you need a different mix of channels to achieve a communication objective. And you know, maybe I will get to advertising one day, but it's not the be all and end all. I would much rather have that early connection and that community of people, because also, you know, what feedback do you get from ads? You know, you might get a dashboard and that's it. And you know, I think personality wise, I'm far more interested in people than I am in data. You know, data is my day job, and I'm all over that day by day, but ultimately, you know, you can't really tell, but from a sales figure or a click-through, what people thought or felt. And you know, books are about creating that connection, that feeling with people. So yeah, I think that's why for the moment I'm just kind of staying away from the advertising piece.
So do you have a favorite social media platform?
I think Instagram, probably, because I got my head around it more. I can't remember when I did your course, actually, that first kind of Instagram 101 course, and that was the first, like, literally,
it must have been a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, it must be. So I feel like I've had a better grounding in Instagram under your tutelage. So that's probably my go-to. I've got a Facebook page as well. I've got a TikTok page, but do not expect me to be doing, you know, face videos, and as hell will freeze over before I dance with my book. You know, all credit to those people who are out there doing all of that, but it's never going to be me. I've got Twitter as well, but I find writing Twitter like really random, and I don't know why, because I love dog Twitter, you know, for my dog blogs and you know, general entertainment. Dog Twitter is like awesome, and then writing Twitter just seems to be full of people going, if you had to eat popcorn or ice cream every day for the rest of your life, which one would you choose? And I'm like, how is this relevant to writing books? I don't get it. It's not even like I'm having a difficult plot dilemma, you know, what do you think? It's completely mental. So I kind of check in every now and again, have a look, and then walk away. I'm not quite sure. But maybe, you know, maybe I just haven't put the time into following the right people, but they all seem very sensible when I followed them.
It can be difficult on a new platform to find sort of the right people, your people.
Yeah.
And I think it is. And I noticed that when people start on any platform, there is this tendency to lean towards the people who do what they do. So like other authors or other marketers or other Pilates instructors, or people who do the same thing. And it's really interesting to me that people seem to just naturally go that way, because if you're using it for business, it's kind of like, but the people you want to be speaking to are people who you want to work with, or in your case, who you want to read your book. Like, it's not other writers. I do think there's something to be said. Like, I use Twitter less for marketing and more for just connecting with the marketing community on there and seeing like what they're talking about, what's coming up, all that kind of thing. And there is something to be said for using platforms differently. And if you found that sort of writing Twitter was full of inspiration and motivation and stuff, which potentially it is not.
I mean, I couldn't make up my mind, right? Popcorn or ice cream, I love them both.
But yeah, it can be difficult to initially sort of build that community or find the one that's already there. Yeah.
And I think there's a tendency as well to kind of have like, school disco mode, in that you're like clinging to the wall and you're not quite sure, the rules of the game. So you kind of like lurk for a little bit until you can kind of, get a sense for, because it's a community, it's online, but it's still a community with social norms and all of that you need to get your head around. So I probably will go back at some point, because there are a couple of authors and people I admire that are really prominent on Twitter, and I kind of miss some of the things that they're doing. So I think get book 2 out the way and maybe I'll have another look at it properly. But for now, I'm going to stick with the 2.
Yeah, very good. So do you use social media for your day job as well, or is it just for the book?
It's funny, I did. I use LinkedIn, obviously. I think most people do from a business perspective, but I'm not hugely active on it. And I think that's because I'm in the lovely position of not having to be, in a way. A lot of my work will just find me. It's quite a weird niche that I'm in terms of sustainability and communications. And I'm proper old now, so I've been doing it for a long time, so I know quite a lot of people, which is, wrinkles have their benefits in terms of marketability. So it's really nice that I can work with people and work will find me. So I made a decision quite a while ago that I wasn't going to go out there and overly kind of brand myself and kind of go out searching for work. And I haven't needed to, which I'm eternally grateful for. So, I try and keep my profile vaguely up to date, and I go in and I look at what my peers are doing and keep up to date that way. But I'm not massively active on LinkedIn. I was on Twitter for work, and a few years ago I was a judge on an award, a sustainability award, and kind of stupidly tweeted that I felt guilty because I couldn't go to the awards ceremony, and so I tweeted good luck to everybody, and I got horribly trolled, and it kind of put me off Twitter as well. And it was something just really random, connected to the awards, but I stuck my hand up first to mention it, and that I've kind of backed away off Twitter. I haven't got the time for trolls, but it's mainly the book that I use social media for, and then the dog blog and random personal photos, of which people will probably be sick to the back teeth, but tough.
No, we are never sick of dog photos.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a shame you got trolled on Twitter. I do think Twitter is definitely the worst for that.
Yeah.
They are, I will give them credit, they are trying to bring out things that are improvements to try and reduce that and give people control over like what kind of replies they receive and stuff. So hopefully things will be a little bit less like that over there. But yeah, that is a shame, but it is understandable that you have sort of backed off from that a little bit.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think with any of these platforms, they have to serve you, and because they're a massive time suck, and if you're not getting out of it what you expect to get out of it, we've all got better things to do with our time. So
yeah, I'm interested as well, like, do you think maybe part of the reason you started to step away from it, from your sort of daytime job, was because you wanted to shift towards your identity as an author, if you will. Do you think that was part of it, or was that just sort of happenstance?
I think that was probably happenstance. I'm a bit weird on identity. I mean, I'm Welsh by birth, but I've never been like overly nationalistic. You know, I don't. Yeah, it's not that kind of a sticky an issue for me. You know, it's like I'm a person and that's all that matters, kind of thing. So it did take me a long time though to put author, and that's why my website, I made myself choose a URL with author in it, because it felt utterly pretentious and I needed to push myself. And but I'm a writer by day, you know, so I write sustainability reports for a living. So yeah, I'm a writer, you know, that's 20 years I'm a writer, it's fine. So that thing about making the leap from writer to author felt like a deliberate step that I needed to take. So yeah, maybe I've just undone what I said about identity, because it did feel really uncomfortable but necessary to go, yes, I'm going to pretend to be an author. Put my hand up to that.
You are definitely not pretending.
Thank you.
What other marketing do you do outside of social media for the book?
I probably don't do enough. I've got a newsletter, so you know, back to that kind of independent mindset. You know, I'm always a little bit cautious about putting all my eggs in one basket for anything. So you know, really early on, I decided that you know, heaven forbid one of those social media platforms goes down. I wanted to be able to connect with readers in a different way. So I've got a mailing list that I'm building up, and you know, people can like get free short stories and that kind of thing, and I send out one email once a month and update people on different things. I do interviews with interesting people, and yeah, that's mainly the other form of marketing. I've done one event, I'm looking at another in-person event. But of course, I launched the book right in the middle of lockdown. So things like signings and, you know, all the other things that would have been ideal to get to my target audience kind of went out the window. So I'm hoping now that, you know, with restrictions easing, that will ease up and I can get out and about a little bit more and do a bit more kind of in-person marketing as well.
Is that side of things more difficult to organize as an independent author, or is that I in my head I imagine that is the kind of thing that a publisher can help more with, that they have potentially the contacts and know how to organize signings and events and stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think if you've got the weight or even just the name of a publisher behind you, it's a lot easier. One of those nice to do things that you'd like to be able to point at as a milestone on your kind of, you know, your author journey. So yeah, I think there are definite advantages with people who actually know what they're doing, other than people who, like me, are making it up as they go along. Taking a problem a day at a time.
So it would appear marketing is quite difficult for you then. But is writing difficult as well, or does that come easy to you and the rest of it is the hard work?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this because, you know, my background is marketing, my postgrad is marketing, you know, I am technically a marketeer, but it's really difficult marketing yourself. And, you know, I can be very sensible when it comes to marketing other people. And, you know, you turn that spotlight on me and I'm like, oh, right, I'm off. So I'm getting my head around the marketing. The writing is probably the most joyful part of all of it, and you know, I love that because when I'm writing, you know, I'm in my happy place and time kind of melts away and I'm like, oh my god, I've been here all day, wow. So that bit is really easy. The hard bit is because you've got the writing, you've got the publishing, and by publishing I mean like all the admin. I, you know, for the new book launch, I'm actually trying to make like one list of everything. It's on a Trello board at the moment, so there's probably about 50 different cards, but there must be about 250 different actions, because it's everything from sizing to uploading to different platforms to sorting covers. Yesterday, I don't know how I did it, but I format all my own books as well, and I managed to delete all of my formatted books, and I couldn't then retrieve them out of my bin. I have no idea how I did it. And I just sat here going, right, there's nobody coming to save you. You're going to have to figure this out for yourself, or you're going to have to reformat, 3 different versions of Ethereal, 3 different versions of the sequel, and all the short stories that you've written ever. And all of that is just a major time commitment. And, it's not all the time, but at the moment it's a 7-day-a-week job, and it has been for about 3 weeks. And and then you add the marketing on top. So that can be difficult. And that's probably why I'm not terribly consistent with my social, because I get to the end of the day and I'm like, don't even show me Canva. I can't do it.
Oh dear. What's the hardest part of writing for you?
Time. I think, I've got my work in progress or my ideas file. I've probably got 5 different books. I've got a cozy romance half written. And then, I know, a bit random. I was in lockdown. I think I just needed comfort. So I wrote this really schmaltzy, lovely little thing that I will go back to one day, but probably not yet. And there's 5 books in the pipeline waiting patiently. So there's lots of ideas, and now I've got a better idea of the process. I think that is easier to start with a blank page and have an idea of what I'm going to be doing, and get on and write. The difficulty at the moment is finding that chunk of creative time. So I'm trying to get up earlier, and just because I'm at my best in the morning, that's my kind of creative time. By the evening, after a day of client work and report writing and business admin, I can barely say my own name. So trying to fit it in the morning, that's the key bit, and I'm trying to keep that up. It's gone out the window the last 3 weeks though, because all about launch and admin on my Trello board.
Oh dear. So that kind of leads me on to the next question. How are you managing to juggle like marketing the new book, potentially writing other books, daytime work, having a life, being a pet parent?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, that is hard work. I think sometimes I don't manage to do the juggle. My red line is client work, because if I've committed to a client that I'm going to do something, then nothing can get in the way. I will not let them down. So I organize my time around my client commitments, and sometimes being a pet parent to a very elderly, poorly dog, means I have to keep that under review, because he's a demanding little toad, lovable that he is. So I think it's just about knowing that you can't do it all. So that bit about having a life, sometimes that is, I'm just going to go and have a walk on my own, or I'm just going to say, well, I get to watch an hour of TV. But I get frustrated when people talk about being able to do everything, because we can't. I think having an expectation like that you can just keep juggling all the time, just sets people up for poor mental health, really. And I just set my expectation to say, right, client work, I've got to look after Bear. I've got to make sure that the basics are all looked after, but it might mean that I don't get to go out for a few weeks, or I don't get a lie-in at a weekend, and that's just the price you have to pay if you want to achieve something. And even having that clarity helps take the pressure off, I think.
Yeah, I do. I agree. And I think it's lovely when people say, like, you can do everything, you can have it all. And I think, yeah, but you can't have it all at the same time. Like, you can have everything, but it's not all going to be happening at the same time all the time. And I
Yeah,
think that's something we all need to sort of learn to like lean into. Like, right now is for you, launch, marketing the book, getting the book out there, and client work. And there. And that there have to be, like, your priorities will shift. And I would hope that once the book is out there and you have lots of amazing reviews, that your priority will shift slightly to more sort of self-care and rest and looking after yourself and
definitely.
doing some sort of fun things, catching up with people, that kind of thing. And I think we have this sort of false understanding that what having it all looks like is being on top of absolutely everything every single day,
Yeah.
365 days a year. And like, nobody is doing that. Really.
And I think, yesterday's kind of accidental file delete issue, I said to my husband, I was like, remember when we went on holiday to Greece and they had that kind of, they were recreating a Greek wedding with like, smashing plates. It was like, this is what happened. I feel like I'm back there because suddenly all the plates I've been spinning are like on the floor in bits. And I think, I need to remind myself that, there will be peaks and troughs, and you have to take that, you have to take whatever is kind of thrown at you. And something you said about, taking it a step at a time, because I think that's a lovely analogy as well for figuring things out. And I think, at the beginning of this process, I wanted to see like every step and I wanted to be really clear about where I was going. And now I'm like, okay, well, I just need to know the next thing I need to do. And when I get to that, I'll figure out the next bit. And again, I think that takes the pressure off and helps with that idea of juggling, because I don't need every plate spinning all the time. Maybe I can leave a couple drop and then I can focus and come back to them when I've got a little bit more brain space. So I think ultimately it's just being kind to yourself and managing your own expectations, which invariably for me are like way higher than I'm actually capable of achieving. I should be able to do 19 hours a day. Why am I failing at this?
Yeah, I think that's pretty relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah, big time.
And I think one of the reasons I enjoyed the book is because one of the things one of the plates that I am spinning is like, how do I live more sustainably? How do I sort of lessen my impact on the planet? And that's like a really strong theme through the first book, is that sort of environmental responsibility and what is happening to the planet. Why is that in the book? Where did that come from?
I think they say like your first book is a book of your heart, and it would have been impossible for me to write a book without an environmental theme, because it's something that I've cared about, ever since I can remember. Little hippie kid, and I was into saving the whales, and wanted to be a veggie apparently when I was 4, and all these things just like were naturally there. And then I got really lucky in my 20s and got a job. I was working for BT at the time in marketing, and didn't really feel like I was contributing, and I was looking to go and work for a charity, because I really wanted to do something that felt like I was making more of a contribution. And while I was looking, this job came up in the group team looking at sustainability communications. So I got to kind of live my passion for sustainability and bring my communications and marketing skills, to bear to help move the agenda forward. And I had 10 years there, and it was amazing, and I got to do some really amazing things. And it was at that time I started writing Ethereal, and I think part of it was like therapy, because we were really privileged. We got to talk to real experts that came in. We hosted Al Gore when he came before the film. When he came into London to do the slideshow, with the little laser pointer that appears in the film, when he did that in London, we hosted him. And it was incredible, but it was also really, really hard work. So I'd be writing these briefings for senior leaders, talking about, horrific kind of public, predictions and projections around, rising sea levels and flooding and mass migration and water shortages and pandemics and all of these things that are, have been known. We're going back like 20 years. And a couple of times, people now talk about eco grief and eco guilt and eco-related depression. And I think all of us in the team went through these periods. And I remember reading one UN report, and that was it. I think I had like 3 weeks of all news, just hibernated, and writing fiction where I could be in control of the world and say, no, it will be okay, no spoilers. Was just really cathartic because I felt like I was doing something. But I find it really weird now when people, a couple of reviews are lovely and people are going, oh, this is so of our time. And it's like, it is, but it's been of our time for 20, 30, 40 years. And I'm so glad that it's finally landed with people. But, working in this field for 20 years now, sometimes you just felt like you were shouting into a void and nobody was listening. And I think that's where fiction, for me, kind of jumped in and offered me a little bit of a lifeboat.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting you say that a lot of the feedback is like, this is so relevant right now. But like you say, it has been relevant for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's just many people didn't realize it. For people who have not read the book, you're missing out. I'm gonna just read the blurb for you. Super empath Lily is almost relieved to be living her last human life. With only her spirit guide Jack for company and the world collapsing around them, she longs for the peace of the eternal forest. When by chance Lily meets Storm, a widowed ex-witch who has lost her magic, both women discover that sometimes life can turn on a sixpence. As Lily falls in love with life, Storm joins her old friend, retired vicar Henry, on a desperate quest to find the one being on Earth capable of stopping the apocalypse. Only the First Ethereal can decide whether there is enough good left in humanity to save us, but will the friends find it in time? Also hunting the Ethereal, but with murderous intent, is a group determined to hang on to their wealth and power and ride out the apocalypse in luxury. The race is on, and the stakes couldn't be any higher.
I think, the other thing I'd say as well is, I think anybody who's creating in the world, almost if they care about this stuff, they have I shouldn't be really judgmental. I feel I've got a duty to kind of bring this up in, art, because we need to talk about it. We need to find different ways of talking about it. And I think people, we've always learned through story. And the idea that, we can change culture through corporate responsibility or through government policy or through news items, it was things like Blue Planet that really started to move the needle. Because there was a story about what was happening with plastic pollution that was brought into consciousness. So I really feel that anybody that's putting creative content into the world should be thinking of these things, because we can't get away with being casually destructive. In the same way that, like, I had to stop listening to the news quiz back last year because every gag seemed to be an animal abuse gag, or they were laughing at an animal that was killed or maimed or hurt or injured, and I'm like, why are we putting up with that? Why is this humor? That this shouldn't have a place in humor. And I think as creators we need to take responsibility for that and not create that norm, that narrative around it's okay to abuse animals or it's okay to be, environmentally destructive just because we're creating characters that do that. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, and hopefully a subtle way.
No, and I think especially fiction, but art generally is it's a safe place for people to figure out their feelings around stuff. And I
Yeah, good
think
point.
because when I think about sort of the content of the First Ethereal, I felt really deeply that like this is what we're going through, you know, like this is life. But because it's fictional, there was enough distance for me to be able to look at it more objectively, if you like, and figure out like, well, okay, which of these is the biggest priority for me? Which of these is making me feel the most? What are some things I think I can do to change those things? Because that distance feels less judgmental, I think.
Yes.
If you're reading a story and you're going, oh yeah, okay, this kind of rings true. I see this happening around me. You have more space to consider your feelings than if you're, say, watching the news and seeing like this is happening and this is happening and these activists are doing this, and you feel that the immediacy and the judgment of if you're not doing anything or you feel you're not doing enough. And I think that shuts people down, whereas art allows people to come into it wherever they are. You know, like it opens the discussion for everybody to take whatever it is they need and go, okay, well, this is where I'm at now. What can I learn from this? Where do I want to start? Rather than like, you need to be doing all the things right now.
Yeah. And as such a lovely way of explaining that, because I think, you know, we know willful blindness is a thing, and people are capable of literally ignoring or not seeing atrocities. You know, if the cognitive impact is too high for people, they will switch off, and you cannot get through to them. And I think this is where we're getting a lot of entrenchment in different areas of life at the moment. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, and it's just a gentle way into the issues without beating people over the head or making them feel bad. You know, nobody needs to feel bad about being alive. We can all do something. So yeah, art is definitely an important tool in the toolbox.
And coming back, you were talking about animals and animal abuse, and they're another sort of big feature in the book, which is another reason, definitely an animal lover. So was there sort of a reason that you chose to make animals sort of characters themselves in the book?
I think it goes back to that point of, you know, if anybody who knows me had to kind of, you know, pick a load of things that was going to go into a book that I'd written, then, you know, up there with environment would be animals. You know, it's just impossible not for me to write that. But I think they're definitely characters in their own right, because I think I was reacting to a little bit of a kind of tendency in the writing world. There was like this famous book, you know, everybody's told about it when they start writing, called Kill the Cat. And I think they've rebranded it now to Save the Cat, because obviously Kill the Cat's not a nice title. But it was advocating a way of developing characters and instantly conveying to the reader that they were bad by having them abuse or kill an animal. Or on the flip side, you know, if Joe Bloggs like saves the puppy, then obviously he's a good guy. And I just really I hate that. It's like, you know, why are animals a vehicle for violence? You know, there have got to be better ways of showing up as a storyteller than, you know, bluntly kind of killing or abusing, or it just doesn't feel like the right approach for the world we live in. So yeah, I wanted that to be a more deliberate, you know, animals in our lives are parts of the family, and therefore why wouldn't they be characters in their own right, other than, you know, appendages? We wouldn't, you know, can you imagine somebody writing a Kill the Cat type book and talking about women? You know, if you want a man to be a bad character or a woman to be a bad character, just have him kill a woman, you know, or a small child. Like, horrific. It's like, you couldn't do that. So yeah, my little stand against cruelty.
Yeah, and I think as well, like it's it's easy to use that shorthand because people
Lazy.
understand it. Like, yeah, if somebody walks down the street and kicks a cat, most people will make a lot of judgments that are not great about that person.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to sort of challenge yourself by questioning those things and taking that option away, because it can make you so much more creative and make you think differently as well about good and evil and about what those things actually mean and how they look in real life. Because if you take away that shorthand, it's suddenly like, well, what else is there? What else shows that somebody is a bad person or that you should be wary of them or whatever? And I think that's true of sort of all stereotypes, really. If you're creating art or something and you take away those options for yourself and say, I'm not going to lean into these, what am I actually trying to say? Right, how do I say that more directly but still in an artistic manner? It can create much more interesting art.
Definitely, yeah, 100% agree. Though I think that they call it something like enabling constraints or something. There was somebody who wrote a book, wasn't there, without any vowels or without the letter I or something. I mean, that goes to an extreme, but I completely see what you mean. Yeah, you've got to kind of give yourself some boundaries to work within.
Yeah. So what is that's my bit of writing advice. what is the best bit of sort of writing advice that somebody's given you?
I think there have been a few bits. One was just write and don't edit, because I think, you know, coming from a point of fear and judgment and it's all got to be perfect, can be really debilitating with like a first draft, and you end up rewriting draft. You know, chapter 1 of Ethereal probably was rewritten 30 times, 40 times, and it's ridiculous because you know that shouldn't be the way you do it in the beginning. And you know, with later chapters, I just decided the first draft was going to be a hot mess, and it had to be, because it was me telling myself the story. I was going to get it all out, and then I'd pick it all up in editing. And I think that's just something you learn if you do it once and you go, okay, I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to come back to that. So that was really good advice. And then the other bit of advice, I think I credit with actually having the courage to publish Ethereal, because I had a massive wobble before I did it. And I started to kind of sit myself down and go, why don't you just give it another few months? Write the next book, see if you can do it again. And then and I was listening to, funnily enough, a podcast, and the guy, I can't even remember who he was. I might have been some Joanna Penn's podcast, and whoever it was, they just said, look, you always have to have book number 1. You can't have book 2, 3, 4, 10, 100 unless there's book 1. So stop worrying about it and just get it out. And that was probably like the day before my launch. And I thought, I needed to hear that today. So whether this is like an absolute, flop, or whether, I'm quite pleased with it when it comes out, it's got to be book 1, because I can't have book 2, 3, or 4 unless I publish it. So yeah, that was a bit of advice that really kind of sat with me and was so timely. I'm just really grateful for it.
Yeah. I am very glad that you took that advice on board and published book 1. And now here we are, book 2 is coming out. So tell me about the new book.
So the new book is called The Cold of Summer. I can't say too much, actually, because it's probably going to be a bit of a spoiler for Ethereal, but it picks up where Ethereal left off, but 10 years in the future. And this was my opportunity to get really creative and imagine a better world. And I feel like I've spent my career talking about a better world and what that might look like. And I hope people will like it. If they liked Ethereal, I hope they will. But it obviously, has scenes of malperil as things start to unravel, and it pulls the main protagonist into some really hell-like conditions. So yes, and it'll be out on the 1st of March, St. David's Day.
Very exciting. So when this goes out, it will already be out.
Dun,
Go
dun,
and
dun.
buy it. I
Available from all bookshops.
have pre-ordered. I am
Oh.
waiting. I am just at my Kindle waiting for it to appear.
Oh, thank you.
So
That's
what is
amazing.
coming next? 2 books? Is there going to be 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, well, hopefully. So I got really excited in January because I had this like big gap where the Cold of Summer was with my editor, so I was sitting there waiting for all his red pen to come back. And I've written a synopsis for book 3. This one is going to be a standalone, so it won't be in Pont Nefoed with my other characters, although I'm sure I'm going to come back to them because I love them too much to leave them alone. But it's going to be more of a witchy book, and I've probably got about 10 research books sitting on my shelf because I got a bit overexcited with and I could read about that, and I could read about this. So yes, that will be my project once I've taken a bit of R&R time to recover from launch and everything else that's going on. I will be straight back into writing.
Very exciting. Very good.
Can't wait.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you for having me, my very first podcast, and you've made it an absolute joy. So thank you very much.
I am honoured. When you are famous, best-selling author, I will be changing all of the podcast information to like New York Times bestseller, Emma, on my podcast.
Oh, if I had ruby slippers, I'd be clicking my heels, making that wish.
So tell people, where can they find you on the interwebs? So
my website is probably the hub, so that's elwilliamsauthor.com. And you can get a free short story prequel to Ethereal from that site. On Facebook, I'm E.L. Williams Author, and on Instagram, I'm E.L. Williams Young, randomly. So that's where you can find me. And I love a natter, so if anybody wants to kind of have a chat, then I'm all up for that.
Very good, very good. And do go and download buy the First Ethereal. Get the first book, get the second book as well, The Cold of Summer, because it will be out now. You can buy them both, binge read them. They're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want more regular reminders to find your own way to use social media, follow Alexis on your social platform of choice. All the links will be in the show notes. Until next time, be a human.